The HOA thought they could push around a simple woman. That was their first mistake. They didn't see Elaine the way I saw her. To them, she was just a quiet homeowner, someone easy to intimidate with letters, threats, and made-up rules. But Elaine was the wife of a veteran, a woman who had stood by me through years of deployments, sleepless nights, and scars that ran deeper than skin. And she wasn't alone. At her side stood Brutus and Delta, two dogs who had once been more than soldiers' companions. They were warriors in their own right. Brutus, the German shepherd, had the kind of presence that could stop a man mid-sentence. His eyes tracked everything, analyzing, assessing, always ready to respond. Delta, the Belgian Malinois, was faster, sharper, the kind of dog you barely saw before she was already at your throat, or stopping an enemy in his tracks with the precision of a scalpel. Both had been trained not for parlor tricks or obedience school, but for the chaos of combat zones. They knew how to distinguish a threat from a civilian, how to subdue without killing, how to hold a man down until backup arrived. These weren't pets. They were soldiers that just happened to wear fur. The HOA didn't see that. All they saw was an opportunity, a way to control us. It started with something laughable, a letter taped to our door. Karen, the HOA president, claimed the dogs disrupted property values. Elaine held that letter like it was a death warrant. She knew how these battles went. HOAs didn't fight fair. They didn't use the law. They used pressure, fear, endless harassment. What looked like a silly note could turn into liens, lawsuits, even attempts to seize our home. I tried to laugh it off at first. Dogs lowering property values? Brutus and Delta were better behaved than most kids on the street. But Elaine had a sense for escalation. She didn't just see a letter, she saw the sense. He first shot fired. She was right. The second letter didn't even bother with official HOA formatting, just a sheet of printer paper slid under our door. Comply or it will get worse. That's when the games began. A drone appeared over our backyard, buzzing low enough to agitate the dogs. At night, I caught it with binoculars and followed its flight path. It landed right on Karen's balcony. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. She smiled. Her words chilled me. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. Then came the shadows. Boot prints near the shed, strange noises at night. Compliance officers marching up the driveway, citing fake laws, waving clipboards like they had authority. The kind of stunt designed to break people down, to make them quit fighting back. But we weren't alone in this fight. We had Brutus and Delta, and they weren't just waiting, they were watching. And when the day came that the HOA tried to push past intimidation into violence, those dogs proved they weren't relics of some forgotten war. They were defenders of this home, this family. And they were ready. It was a Saturday morning when the HOA decided to make their move. The sky was clear, the neighborhood kids were out riding bikes, and Elaine was kneeling in her garden, tending to flowers. That's when the so-called compliance team rolled up. 4 men in plain clothes, Karen trailing behind them with her phone raised like she was live-streaming a conquest. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They just stormed up the driveway, barking orders. Remove the dogs, remove the fence, or we remove you. Elaine didn't flinch. She stood, dirt on her gloves, calm in the face of 4 men trying to overwhelm her. This is private property, she said firmly. You have no authority here. Leave now. But they didn't. One of them stepped closer, puffing out his chest. We don't need a warrant. HOA authorization is enough. A lie. And Elaine knew it. But what struck me wasn't their arrogance, it was their readiness. They weren't here to argue. They were here to escalate. I was halfway down the driveway when it happened. One lunged at Elaine, reaching for her arm, but Brutus was faster. The German shepherd exploded forward like a missile, launching straight into the man's chest. The sound of impact cracked through the quiet morning. The man hit the pavement, gasping for air, Brutus standing over him with a growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. Another swung a metal rod at Delta. Wrong move. She moved with surgical precision, darting sideways before clamping down on his forearm in a perfect bite hold. Not a wild mauling, controlled, disciplined, immobilizing. The man dropped the rod, screaming, as Delta locked him in place. "Call them off!" Karen shrieked, her voice trembling as she fumbled with her phone. Elaine's voice cut through the chaos. "Delta, hold!" The Malinois froze, jaw clamped just tight enough to keep the man subdued, but not tearing him apart. That's the difference between a pet and a soldier. The third thug tried to rush Elaine from the side. "Brutus, drive," she commanded. The shepherd launched, colliding into the man's midsection with the force of a sledgehammer. He crumpled to the ground, stunned. never even close to touching her. By then, neighbors were spilling into the street, phones raised. The crowd shouted, "They're trespassing! Call the cops! Karen's lost her mind!" In that moment, the HOA's intimidation collapsed. Brutus and Delta weren't just defending Elaine, they were exposing the truth. Karen and her thugs weren't enforcers of rules. They were bullies, caught in the act, live on half a dozen cameras. And for the first time, Karen realized the game had shifted. Karen's shrill voice pierced the air, trying to claw back control of the situation. "This is asshole. What? Your animals are out of control," she shouted, her phone still raised as though recording would somehow bend the truth in her favor. But the truth was already spilling across the neighborhood like wildfire. Every angle was being captured by dozens of other phones, and no matter how Karen twisted it, everyone had seen the same thing. Trespassers attacking a woman on her own property, only to be met with disciplined force. I stepped closer, phone in hand, filming her directly. My voice was steady, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "No, Karen. California Civil Code 3342 makes it clear. Liability doesn't apply when a dog defends its handler from trespassers committing a crime. You just recorded your own people attacking my wife." The shift in the crowd was immediate. Gasps, murmurs, then open condemnation. Neighbors, people who had once been too afraid to speak against Karen's HOA, were finding their voices. "She's lying," one man shouted. "We saw it all," another chimed in. The chant grew louder, and with it, Karen's confidence began to crack. Her thugs, meanwhile, weren't faring much better. One groaned on the ground with Brutus looming over him like a shadow of judgment. Another whimpered as Delta's jaws held him pinned, not tearing, not mauling, just a firm, unrelenting hold that said, "You're not moving until my handler says so." Elaine stood calmly in the center of it all, the dogs locked to her will with perfect obedience. Not wild, not savage, just professional. Karen's face twisted into desperation. "Call them off or you'll regret this," she spat. But her words no longer carried weight. She wasn't feared anymore, she was exposed. The queen of the HOA had been dragged into the dirt in front of her subjects, and the illusion of power she built with fear was dissolving. And then came the sirens. The deputies arrived to a scene of chaos. Neighbors gathered in clusters, cameras raised, Karen screeching about assault, and 4 men nursing bruises and torn pride on our driveway. But Elaine? Elaine stood firm, dogs at her side, the picture of composure. The real battle was about to begin. Not fists, not fangs, but law against lies. Karen pounced on the deputies the moment they stepped out of their cruiser, throwing herself into the role of victim. "They set their attack dogs on us," she cried, her voice cracking in all the wrong places. She waved her phone like a talisman, hoping it could erase the evidence of the neighborhood's eyes. "These animals are weapons. I demand they be destroyed." Behind her, her men clutched their arms and chests, groaning, too ashamed to meet the deputies' eyes. None of them looked like victims, more like criminals caught red-handed. Elaine clipped both dogs to their leads before the deputies even asked, commanding them to sit at her side. Brutus sat tall, chest broad, gaze forward. Delta lowered her ears, tail still, every muscle tense but controlled. They didn't lunge, they didn't bark. They sat in absolute silence, proof of the training that had made them more disciplined than the men who had tried to attack their handler. I stepped forward and handed my phone to one of the deputies. "You'll want to see this," I said. The deputy pressed play, and the truth unfolded. Karen's men stepping onto our property, issuing threats, one lunging for Elaine, the dogs responding with trained precision. It only took 30 seconds before the deputy stopped the video, jaw tight, eyes narrowing at Karen. "Ma'am," he said sharply, "you and your associates are under investigation for criminal trespass under Penal Code 602 and assault under Penal Code 240. These dogs didn't attack. They defended their handler from an imminent threat." "Police," Karen's voice cracked into a shriek. "That's not true. HOA authorization." The deputy cut her off cold. "HOA rules do not supersede state law. You had no authority to step foot on their property, let alone put your hands on anyone. Frankly, you're lucky those dogs are disciplined. A lesser-trained animal could have done permanent damage." The crowd erupted again. Applause, cheers, even laughter. Phones remained pointed at Karen, catching every flicker of rage and panic across her face. Her power was unraveling, strand by strand. Karen tried one last card, her voice dropping into a hiss. Fine, charge me, but those beasts still get put down. That's what happens when dogs bite people. The deputy shook his head, eyes firm. Wrong again. California Civil Code 3342 specifically exempts dogs that defend their owners from trespassers committing crimes. These animals won't face consequences. You will. The cheer that followed was deafening. The cuffs clicked around Karen's wrists, and for the first time in years, silence fell over her like a weight. No longer the queen of the cul-de-sac, no longer the face of authority, just another criminal being read her rights on the very street she had ruled through fear. Her men were rounded up too, groaning as they were guided into the back of the squad cars. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, phones recording, voices raised in triumph. What had once been a community shackled by intimidation was now free, united by the spectacle of Karen's downfall. Children clapped, adults whistled, and strangers nodded at us with newfound respect. Elaine knelt beside Brutus and Delta, wrapping her arms around them. Their tails wagged gently, as though the battle had been nothing more than a game. To them, it wasn't heroics, it was duty. The same duty they had once performed overseas, now carried out in a quiet neighborhood against enemies who thought rules could be twisty, into weapons. You see that? I told Elaine, my voice breaking into a rare smile. They didn't just protect you, they exposed Karen for what she really is. Elaine looked up, eyes fierce but proud. They're not just dogs, they're family, and Karen just learned the hard way what happens when you mess with family. The squad cars rolled away, red and blue lights fading into the distance. The street was still buzzing with voices, but something fundamental had shifted. The fear that once shadowed this neighborhood was gone. The HOA's reign of intimidation had been shattered in one decisive moment by two dogs who reminded everyone that discipline and loyalty outweighed fear and lies. That night, the neighborhood slept easier. And in the quiet of our home, Brutus and Delta stretched out at Elaine's feet, their breathing steady, their watch never ending. Because deep down, we knew this wasn't just about Karen. It was about anyone who thought they could trespass against us, against what we loved, and walk away unscathed. Brutus and Delta had written their names into HOA history, not as pets, not as threats, but as the guardians no one had seen coming. And they were ready, should anyone else be foolish enough to try again.